Hi, so my name is Molly Sauter. I'm a grad student at the Center for Civic Media at MIT. And one thing I've noticed as I'm having these wonderful conversations with people here and going to these great sessions is the prevalence of the use of the hacker identity among people here. People like to say that I'm a hacker, or I hack on things, or this project was a hack. But that identity is actually very dense and deep. And one thing I'm going to talk about in this talk is how that identity has changed sort of in the public eye. We no longer strictly think of hackers as cool computer nerds with stuff. Instead, that identity has migrated in the popular press to really being a synonym for criminality. And that's how a lot of people think about that. And part of this shift has scooped up a lot of other things in it. So we call activists hackers. We call electronic artists hackers. We call a lot of different subcomputer subcultures. They fall within that hacker identity. This shift now means that as those identities are associated with the quote-unquote hacker identity, they also get associated with the criminal identity. And what this means is we don't rehabilitate the computer criminal concept by associating it with cool people like digital activists or artists. It means that all of those people now are just brought down by that criminal identity, which creates a chilling effect. It means that those computer subcultures and those non-traditional computer uses are socially discriminated against. They're seen as bad and things that are not meant to be encouraged. And this makes it easier for governments and corporations to institute laws and policies about crushing those uses and identities. These things are not seen to be valuable at the time. So it's much easier to regulate them out of existence. An example of this shift, we can see it in the news coverage of Kevin Mitnick, who I'm sure most of you have heard of. I've been doing a project studying the New York Times coverage of Kevin Mitnick from 1994 to 2012. There were 47 stories in that time that mentioned Kevin Mitnick. The New York Times calls Kevin Mitnick a lot of things during that time. Mostly these stories refer to him as a hacker. In the early days, though, that identity is modified by other words like felon, criminal, fugitive, words that tag Mitnick as being a bad actor without relying on the hacker term to tag him as a bad actor. But around 2003, those words fall away. We stop using them. And instead, he's just the hacker. He also becomes a stand-in for all hackers. He's used as an example in a lot of stories as the hacker person, thus representing all hackers. Around that time that those words fall away, we also see the ex-hacker concept coming up. And the interesting thing about the ex-hacker concept is it tags the hacker as something that needs to be shed. We shed the hacker identity to become the socially acceptable ex-hacker or security professional. We can also see this concept happening in the ethical hacker professionalized concept, where the hacker identity has to be modified by ethics in order to be socially acceptable. These rhetorical structures that we see in the New York Times story, we see in lots of other news stories. We see lots of activists being called hackers, lots of criminals being called hackers. We see someone being charged as a hacker for a perceived criminal act. And what this does is it turns activism, it turns artistry, it turns tinkering, it turns unofficial engineering into socially unacceptable actions. Instead of us promoting these actions, us promoting these ethics in these types of media stories, we are pushing them down. And what this means is all the philosophies that are associated with that and all the values that are associated with those actions, like freedom of information, or the ability to communicate privately online, or the ability to open up technology once you buy it, all of that is also getting forced down as seen as socially unacceptable. And so my question to all of you now is, as we move vulnerable political speech to the internet, as we use the internet as a place where we're going to have new forms of political activism and new forms of political protest, do we really want the way that we as sort of nation states and corporate identities and media conglomerates, the way that we interact with those identities to be regulated by our fear of this guy? Because maybe that's not the way we want to be structuring our society now. Thank you.